If you clicked on this video, then it's safe to assume that you need to hang or mount something on your plaster wall. By now, you've probably realized that your plaster wall is different than a typical drywall. It's hard, it's brittle. If you try to hammer a nail into it, the nail may bend and the plaster may crack. If you try to screw a screw directly into it, same thing. You might end up with a bunch of cracked plaster, a mess, and nothing hung up on your wall. So in this video I want to show you a couple of things that you should not do, and then a couple of things that you should do, and a couple options that you have. If you're trying to hang something heavy like a TV or a heavy mirror, I recommend you check out my video on how to mount a TV into a plaster wall. What that's going to involve is finding the stud behind the plaster and lath. And you do that by using a stud finder, a magnetic stud finder, not a regular stud finder. A regular stud finder will show up false positives and you won't be able to really find a stud. So what you want to do is find the nails that are nailed into the lath, which is holding up the lath into the stud. And you do that with this magnetic stud finder. You just wave it over the wall until you eventually find something magnetic, and then you just want to go up vertical, and if you find a bunch of other nails, then you're in luck, you found the stud. And then if you have something heavy, then you want to actually screw a screw directly into the stud, and whatever it is you're hanging up, and then when you'll hang it up on that screw, or if it's a bracket or something, you just screw it all the way into the stud. For lighter items or items that you want across the whole wall, perhaps a whole bunch of pictures or something that does not require mounting into the stud and doesn't need it. If the location of the thing you want to hang up on your wall is not where a stud is, or if you can't find a stud, then your next option is toggle bolts. What toggle bolts do is you drill a large hole, and then whatever you're hanging up on the wall is put onto the bolt, and then you push this through, and then behind the wall the toggle flips open, and then you'll pull this against the back of the wall, in this case a bunch of plaster or the wooden laths. Either one, it's going to grab on the back of that material, and then you will tighten the bolt until eventually this part is tightened all the way up to the back of the wall. A caveat about the old school toggle bolts that I have here is that you're not going to be able to get away with just drilling a half-inch hole, because this is actually wider than a half an inch. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a 9/16 paddle bit which I had to buy, and as you can see it's about 9/16. When I was trying to put a toggle bolt through a plaster and lath wall, I couldn't get it in because these parts here were hitting against the wood. And you can get away with a half-inch hole in drywall because it's softer material, but you wouldn't be able to get it through that, so you'd have to drill a 9/16 if you want to use this. Much better option is to get one of these more modern flip toggles. This will only require a half-inch hole. You can just drill straight through the plaster and the lath to get a smooth bore half-inch hole, and then you push this part through, pull it back, and what it does is it flips open, and this plastic flange gets pushed up flush to the wall. You break off this part, and then the bolt will then go through, and then what you'll have is whatever you're mounting to the wall will be connected to the back part and fastened to this part, so that you'll have these things can hold up to over 100 pounds. And this half-inch, the one with the half-inch hole can hold about 90 pounds, and then there's a 3/8 inch one which can hold about 70 pounds. So these can be done without a wood stud and anywhere in the wall, basically. Another thing to mention really quick is you want to use tape over wherever you're gonna drill, because plaster can be very brittle and it can crack. if it cracks so much, you won't be able to push this plastic flange up, and then you'll have a problem. And this goes with any size hole that you're gonna drill into the wall. Use the tape, and that way you get a nice smooth hole that's not gonna crack. And as far as smaller, if you don't want to spend $1 or $2 that these things cost, and you have a bunch of pictures, then you can use basically any plastic expansion anchor. The basic option would be to use one of these plugs. These things are basically just, you drill whatever size it is, 1/4 inch, and then you push this in, and then it gives you an area that you can then screw into. And then the idea is that it expands into the surrounding material, and then it holds. These things have a terrible pull-out strength. It basically will pull right out. But if you have a long enough screw, you can push this into the plaster and then drill into it, and then it will hold a few pounds. A picture or whatever. The same thing with the larger ones, but you want to make sure you use a large enough screw that it's actually going to push and expand the plastic into the surrounding material. If you don't, then it's not going to expand. A better option would be to use basically any expansion anchor. In drywall, the way it works is this would expand behind as you screw into it, and then this part will expand a little bit behind the drywall, and then it'll help hold it. In plaster or masonry, I actually used this in a cinder block wall, and it held extremely well, especially if you use a long enough screw. Actually, only if you use a long enough screw, because the idea is that it drills into behind here and it will expand, and even though the screw is going past where the plug is, at the very end it's going to be expanded into the 1/4 inch hole, and it's holding extremely tight. And the same idea can be used in a plaster wall, whether you're in the plaster or the wooden lath. It doesn't even need to expand behind it, it just expands within that small hole, and the material is hard enough that it will actually hold and give actually a significant pull-out strength in addition to shear strength. And then you might want to say, well, why don't you use one of these picture hangers if you have something like a mirror on a wire and you don't want to just put it on top of a screw and you want to use one of these hooks? Well, you just basically do the same thing. You want to find out where you want to hang it, and you'll drill the hole, push the plastic plug in, and then what you'll do is you'll get the one that has the hole in the middle. OOK has these. This one's rated for 50 pounds. And then you'll basically screw this into the plug, which will expand and then hold, and then you'll have enough weight. Now, of course, if you're hanging something very heavy, like I said, you should be using the magnetic stud finder to find the stud, but you could also use one of these to hang a smaller item, of course. And finally, you can't use anything with a spiral or a self-drilling, because the threads will break the plaster up. So you just want the smooth hole, and then some kind of expansion anchor. Could even be a tiny 3/16 anchor for a very small picture, and then you can just hang it on a very small screw. I would use these as a last option, these kind of plugs. Heavier items, you can use a toggle bolt. And one more thing about the toggle bolt, you want to make sure it's long enough. I would use a 3-inch bolt, because you have to push this beyond the back of the material, and if it's too short, it won't ever get to the back. That's another problem I had with the shorter ones. But if it's long enough, say 3-inch, then it will expand beyond, and then you can pull it back. And then whatever you're hanging up Then you just hold whatever it is and pull it tight. So you'll just be doing this, and then it'll expand, and then you just hold this, pull it tight, and then you screw it in with either a screwdriver or an electric screwdriver. So that's it for this video. Ideas on how to easily hang pictures or basically anything in a plaster and lath wall. If you do need to find a stud in a plaster wall, I have a link to these in the description. You can go get those. They're not that expensive. And then subscribe for more tips just like this. And thank you for watching.